This is Robert here at Guzzi Fabrication. Now we're going to jump right in the middle of this 1962 Impala build. Front floor, upper deck, rear trunk, inner and outer wheel houses installed. We're going to give you some tips and tricks on installing the quarter panels. Let's go. And to start this off, we're going to get the remnant of the quarter panels removed. And that's where the factory resistance welds would be, to attach the quarter panel to that deck filler. So we're going to uncover those areas with a wire wheel. Now from the factory, after they resistance welded panels together, they would finish off the ends with brass brazing. And then they would use lead in other areas. And there's the brass. And we want to know where that is because we need to remove that. It's not going to go very well to weld over, and there could be possibly rust underneath the brass. So we're going to get that out. And I'm not quite sure how I want to affix this quarter panel yet, so I'm still going to leave this little lip. And we're going to get close on this back piece, cutting it off. Now you can see there are a lot of little resistance welds here. Traditionally, yeah, you would drill these out and then separate it, but that's not going to work out real well because we'd have so many holes. Well, we're just going to use a different method. And this is my preferred method anyway. If we work carefully, slowly turn down the pressure on the air hammer, well, we can work around the resistance welds and get this off really nice and clean, the remnant of the quarter panel. And just a little bit at a time. Can't rush this step. And there we've got one end started. Okay, now this is the driver's side. And it's all been cleaned and prepped, and this is what we have to work with. And what we're doing here, we're punching holes with a manual hole punch, and we are going to plug weld this from the inside. Yeah, it'll be a little tricky, but we can get it done. Okay, and there it is. And as always, anytime there's bare metal, bare steel, especially if two pieces are sandwiching together, well, we put a little weld-through primer on that area. Never want to leave it in bare steel. Reinstall the self-tapping screws to hold it in place. Prep it to weld. And you can see we already have our weld through primer behind that. Okay, we're going to punch some holes in the lower part of the quarter panel flange. And now the wheel well opening, and that's going to mount to the outer wheel well housing. We always want to try to keep the welds evenly spaced. Now we're going to hold it into place and go ahead and install some set screws, self-tapping screws. And we want to keep both of those flanges really nice and sandwiched together. We don't want it to have gaps or separate. That's just going to be ugly, and yeah, it's not going to look very nice and allow debris and water to get in between. We want a really nice factory looking finish. Hey, we're getting close on this car. And there's a shot before we weld. flange is really nice against the door jamb area there. And we're going to install some plug welds. Nice and tight. Okay, now we're going to start dressing this area down, and we're using a grinding disc there, and then we're going to switch to a flap wheel. And the important thing about doing this is you don't want to remove too much metal. You don't want to make it thin. And let's get started on that wheel well flange. And I call this piggybacking. I don't know what it's really called, but the idea here is to use a clamp on both sides of the plug weld, then plug weld, and that keeps that area really nice and tight, sandwiched together. Then you move the clamp to the other side, or I guess the leapfrogging, whatever, but that's the method I use. And that gives us a really nice tight flange, or tight sandwiched flanges. And there's a shot of the plug welds. Now we're going to dress those down. And we're starting with the grinding wheel, and what we want to do now, this is a process. We want to just barely knock the tops of the plug welds off. We don't want to get aggressive and then dig a little valley into where we just welded. We want to make that just above flush. And then we're going to come back with the next step. Finish these off. And then our next step, now this is a Rolox disc, and now we want to go a little bit more, make that thing flush, make that plug weld flush. Again, not trying to tip it up on its edge or anything like that, keeping it nice and parallel, or as much as possible anyway. And again, grinding any type of metal, you always want to grind the least amount you have to. Now we're going to finish this off with the flap wheel. And that's going to make everything blend out really nicely. And what we're after here, you can see the little divots. That's going to replicate a resistance weld from the factory. And if we do that correctly, yeah, it's going to really give a factory finish. And this is just in bare steel, but once we get this thing primered, then go through all the bodywork steps and it's painted, yeah, it's going to look really, really nice. And we're going to finish off that outer wheel well. And here's what we have. And you'll notice I use clamps instead of hammers. Anytime you see a hammer, okay, a hammer you want to push metal with. You don't want to beat the metal up, put a bunch of dings, dents, things like that in it. Okay, now I have just a little makeshift guard here, and we're going to apply just a little bit of sandable primer. And it's very important anytime you apply primer. Not all primers are sandable. Now this is a really good primer filler. And we're putting just enough on so that it doesn't rust. And there's a shot of that. Okay, now we're going to finish out this rocker flange. And it's still the same steps. Just knock off the tops of the plug wells. Now this is a flat disc on the grinder. It's not a grinding wheel. Yeah, that'd be way too aggressive. Most aftermarket body panels are probably in the around the 19 to 20 gauge range. And yeah, you can't get really aggressive on those. Yeah, this car's coming together really, really nicely. And you can see, you can kind of check the work. You notice the rocker to quarter panel mating area. You see the rocker flange. Both the inner and outer are mated up really nicely. One's not hanging lower than the other. We've got a nice parallel door gap on the bottom edge there. And now we're going to finish this thing off with the flap wheel. And that's, I think that's 80 grit on this little orbital DA. Yeah, I love that thing. It will get into places where, yeah, you'd have to do it by hand otherwise. Really great for door jam areas. And we're just going to prep everything finally with red Scotch-Brite. We're going to be applying a little bit of spot primer there also. And just blending out the EDP coat. And we want to ensure every area is prepped. We don't want to just shoot primer over unprepped areas. Okay, finishing out the door jamb. And let's check our fit. Everything is looking really, really good. Really happy. And we've done a lot of work to this car. If you haven't followed this, yeah, go back and check out day 1 or 2 of this car. You're going to be very surprised. And here's that area we were working on earlier. A little bit of shot primer. Everything looks really nice and straight. Now this area is going to have a little bit of caulking in it anyway on that seam. Let's get the fuel tank door installed. And keeping everything nice and tightly clamped together while we weld. Because as soon as you initiate an arc with a welder, you're putting heat into the parts. And We all know that heat causes things to expand, so it happens really quickly. If those pieces aren't secured together, you initiate that arc, the things are going to start moving really fast, and that's how you get a separation between both of the mating surfaces. Yeah, that's not what we want to do here. And we're going to start dressing this area down, just barely knocking off the tops of the plug welds. I think we're going to probably have one more video. We're down to that. We're going to be fitting the rest of the trunk area, that back little panel on the trunk area. And the metalwork on this car is going to be pretty much completed. Then we'll be moving on to any body work that's on the car. Now the roof, we're going to have, the roof is kind of beat up. We're going to have to do some work there. And you see me just lightly tapping that area, just keeping everything nice and straight. That's a little tack hammer. Yeah, we never want to beat up, especially brand new body panels. And making sure everything is nice and prepped, finishing off with Scotch-Brite. Now there's a few different kinds of Scotch-Brite. Automotive use Scotch-Brite. Usually there's a red and then a gray. The red is more coarse, and then the gray is a finer. And the gray is usually for prepping paint. And that's the primer filler. And like I said, we don't want to put a ton on there. We just want enough to hold it. Keep anything from rust and bare steel. Now I pretty much know where all of the plug welds need to be installed, so I'm going to go ahead, use this tool, put in some punch holes, and we're going to plug weld through these holes. And we're just going to try to equally space them out. Now from the factory, they just went along and resistance welded wherever, so it doesn't have to be precise. And we're doing this now so we can save a step later. So I've decided to go ahead and remove this lip. Now, the way this was assembled, this car, the quarter panels went on first, and then the roof skin. So we're going to have to make some allowances for that, because that really can't happen. Now we're getting all the little remnants out of the way. This was up under the deck filler. And even though we have some primer on this, we want to come back, Scotch-Brite that down. All the areas that are going to be welded, and put a little bit more zinc weld, and that's a weld-through primer. And maybe we can eliminate one step of taking it off, putting it back on to re-prep everything. Okay, here we go. getting the quarter panel set into place. And because we're going over instead of under, well, we're going to have to make some little allowances. Everything's looking pretty decent. And it's like I mentioned, instead of welding everything as we go, which would be a huge mistake, we're going to secure all these panels with screws. And once everything looks right and I'm satisfied with the fit and finish, then we come back and start welding. And I'd like to say thank you to all our followers and supporters. And that's what we have. At this point, lines are looking pretty good. Everything's looking nice, flush, parallel.
So we're just going to repeat the welding process, get this thing all buttoned up, welded, dressed out, and move on. Hey, hit that like and subscribe, leave some comments, good or bad. And as always, thank you for watching.